Hi, my name is Max, I'm a level designer on Fall Guys, and I'm here to show you some advanced tips and tricks on ways to improve your rounds in Fall Guys Creative. So the first thing I want to talk about when making a good level are the three important pillars of making a good level. One of those, I would argue, is theming. You might notice across a lot of the levels that we've made in previous seasons that we always tend to try and stick to one element. A good example of this would be Lily Leapers, which was a level that solely relies on drums to get the player from a low point to a high point, and the interesting ways we can do that in between. When it comes to your rounds, try and make sure you focus on a small subset of obstacles to better portray your idea. It's much better to have a round that will consist of maybe just hammers and pendulums than to have every obstacle under the sun. This keeps your round coherent, it keeps it quite cohesive, and it makes it easier to read. The second thing I'd like to talk about is slapstick comedy. A lot of Fall Guys revolves around players being knocked about here and there and the knocking into each other, and that being a funny moment in and of itself. Some of the best elements of Fall Guys rounds are those moments. You'll always remember in Slime Climb that one little balance beam where there's possibly a player at the end trying to make your life difficult. And ultimately, whilst sometimes frustrating, is also part of the charm. And so making sure that there are elements in your round where you're focusing on how players will interact with your round can lead to comedic moments is important when making a round. And finally, the third point I'd like to make is to do with making your round challenging. Now, most design in games, and including Fall Guys as itself, tries to follow a specific challenge structure. You may have heard of something called a sawtooth structure. This specifically refers to the fact that you want moments of elevated challenge and then a rest. You'll always find a checkpoint offers a good moment of rest for players, so try and make sure that your challenge starts easy at the beginning of the round and progresses to a higher point towards the end of the round. This leads to great finales in a round, this leads to really wonderful moments of joy when you finish it because you got past that last section. Think of it like a boss battle, where you might find that the beginning is a bit easier than the end because they add new moves. In this instance, look at your round as a series of challenges to overcome, and the greater the challenge, the better the payoff. So to continue on from this, I'm going to walk you through some key tools that will make building rounds in Creative a lot easier for you. So let's jump into a round that I've already built. Now, as you can see here, I've put multiple balance beams with some pendulums overlaying it to make a nice challenge for players walking along. If I want to make changes to these balance beams, it's going to be quite complicated and time consuming, and I don't really want to be doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our tools menu and we're going to activate multi-select. This turns on a paintbrush that you can use to select anything you want to take and grab, and we're going to just select all of those. And now I have the opportunity to copy them, move them around as I want, and go from there. Now, in doing so, I'm no longer going to have to try and remake this. I'm no longer going to need to create this from scratch in any capacity. I'm just able to move this around freely, copy some new ones, and build off of that. So should I want to make any drastic changes, the tool makes this a lot easier. The next thing I want to walk you through is fillets. Now, that might sound a bit ambiguous, but I assure you it's going to be incredibly helpful for you. The first thing you'll want to do is have two separate static pieces of geometry. What a fillet will do is fill in the gap between those platforms. Now, as you can see here in a pre-existing part of the round that I've already made, you can see that there's fillets connecting these two angular pieces of geometry. Now, to create that, it's actually already done for you. I have over here two pieces of geometry copied directly from this section. And as you can see, there's nothing connecting them and they're at the same angle. Now, if I wanted to change the angle of these and have them connect, there might be a little gap and that can be quite frustrating. Fortunately, Creative will sort that for you. If I select this object and make sure it's rotated at the correct angle and I bring it in, you'll notice it will automatically create a wedge/fillet that you will need to connect your platforms together. This ensures that when a player is running across the geometry, they won't get any little collision clips and make sure that they run across it smoothly. So the next thing I would like to cover is round information. This is important for adding a bit of flavor to your rounds, giving it a name, a description, but more importantly, setting the player count. So to do that, we're going to go to our pause menu. We're going to press the edit button, which will be different depending on whether you're using a controller or keyboard and mouse. And this is where we can change the name of our round, the description, and the player count. I've obviously just named mine Max's Gauntlet, and I've also added a very simple description. Now you can obviously name your round whatever you want within reason, and a description just to give it a bit of flavor and explain what you're trying to do. The player count, however, is important because that will set the maximum amount of players your round can allow. Do bear in mind when you're building your round out that this is important if you're going to make a smaller round with, say, 20 players compared to a 40-player round. it's much easier to make a round for a smaller subset of players because you're using less geometry. So you want to make sure you take into consideration with your design what the player count will be. And the last thing I want to go over is my personal tips and tricks and unique ways to use some of the geometry and obstacles you have available to you in a round. So the first tip I'm going to give you is about this really lovely platform that you have here. It only costs 15 on your budget, and it's a really nice large piece of geometry that you can use to create some distance, and you can use it in a myriad of ways. I here, for instance, have it flipped upside down so that players have to go over the platform whilst also dodging some hammers. And that's quite cheap on your budget. But what I've actually done later on is use the same thing and made this wonderful tunnel. Now I also have a cannon lined up behind it to fire boulders so that players not only have to avoid the holes, but also have to try and get out of the way of the flying boulders. Something that's interesting to note is you can take a lot of the obstacles and geometry that we give you and turn them around, rotate them, flip them around in different ways that you might not expect. For example, here I've used this one platform in two different sections, but in different ways. One's a platform with hammers on it, the other's a tunnel with boulders firing at you. You can use a lot of the stuff we make to create a myriad of things within Fall Guys Creative. Following on from that, I've actually taken these turnstiles and put them on their side to create sort of like a trap door, which isn't something we've necessarily done before in Fall Guys. Now, when a player comes to this point, they'll reach a wall and something to fall down. This not only creates sort of a blind jump where players might not know what's coming up next, but it also helps them set up for the next section. They'll fall through, land, and then try and tackle the next challenge. And so what will happen is players will fall down this chute, land at the bottom, and have to madly realize what's going on. Now in the actual following section, I have cannons firing, so they're gonna have to really quickly realize what's going on and mad dash up the hill. And again, this is just something you might wanna take into your own rounds. You can create blind dives, you can create these hills and these ramps, and you can do what you want with them. My next tip is actually to do with decoration and obstacles that you might not think can be used in the ways that we've given them to you. Here, I've taken some large inflatable objects and they only cost 5 for your budget, so they're really cheap, and turn them into kind of like lily pads to bounce off of. So if I go into the round, you can actually see that these are quite large rounded objects which create these really nice sort of pathways through to the checkpoint. But also there's other ways we can do that as well. With these larger padded barriers, these are actually bouncy, so when you land on them, the player will actually have to bounce through. Now, you might have thought to use these as a way to block a player, but there's nothing preventing you from using it as a path. Just something to consider for your rounds. There are many ways you can use a lot of these obstacles. We've got arches, we've got all sorts of decorations, but you don't have to use them as decorations. You can use them in interesting ways to create more depth in your round. And finally, my last point is to do with color. Nothing says Fall Guys like popping color and loud visuals. What I've done here is create a long arched pathway with multiple barriers in between just to create some funnels for players to move through. Now the only thing is that if I hadn't changed the colors, it would look really bland and, I'll be honest, not very appealing to the eye. So if you want to make a good Fall Guys round, be sure to take into account color. It's important to kind of differentiate between the different pieces of geometry you'll have in your level so that players can more easily read it. Even if we go back to the other elements of the round, I'm constantly trying to shift between the blues and the purples to make sure that everything is more visually readable. And that's my last tip. I hope you found this video helpful, and I can't wait to see what you will build in Fall Guys Creative. And with that, I'll see you next time.